Now, when it comes to whining, I don't consider that a psychological problem. I consider that a character fault. I hate whiners. I've hated whiners my whole life, and I have tried very hard not to be one myself. And I think anybody that gets a death sentence, be it whether it's cancer or anything else, such as I have, that then proceeds to whine and say, "Why me?" and spin their wheels over that question, they're just wasting time. They're wasting what could be quality time.
There's three truths. You're going to die, I'm going to die, we are all going to die at some point.
None of us will get out of this place alive.
I may die tomorrow.
You may not.
Everyone dies.
And that's not a terrible thing.
People fear death because we all know it's going to happen. If it's not, it's going to happen to us, and it's going to happen to people that we love. And it's so scary, and there's nothing that we can do to control that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always known that I was going to die sometime. I think all of us think it's going to be later.
People are more afraid of the act of dying than they are of death.
Death, that it's chasing me down, that it's chasing everybody down, and that it's just a terrible, terrible, inevitable monster.
And we don't have anyone who has come back and given a good report about death.
What I'm afraid of is what it will do to my family. That's my fear.
You know, and some people are concerned about my legacy or a memorial to me, or did I write this book? Did I make my mark in the world?
We're afraid of anything we don't know, and we don't understand.
And we're not taught how to deal with death. We're not taught to deal with other people's death or our own death. So we don't have any kind of a bank of information to pull from.
Oh gosh, time is running out. I haven't made my relationships with people the way I wanted them. I've screwed those up in a way.
I would love to live another 20 years. Don't get me wrong. I'm not happy about dying now. I mean, excuse me, I'll take any extra time I can get. But if I am going to die, that is natural. People die.
I remember that when my grandmother was murdered, it was after that. I know my sister had died, and I was probably 9 years old. And my mom and dad, they were getting a divorce, so my dad wasn't at home. And I would call my dad every single night saying, "Dad, I'm afraid of death. Dad, I'm afraid of dying. I don't want you to die. I don't want Mom to die." And this was something that kept me awake every single night. And then when I was 14, my dad dies of a heart attack. The thing I remember is a couple days later, after my dad had died, is we were all shuffling into the school library to watch the Challenger launch, and that exploded. And so for me, it was like, everybody's dying. There's no safety. We're all gonna die. So with that outlook, I didn't care about school. What does school matter when, you know, you're gonna die anyways?
If death doesn't do anything else, it gets our attention. Every time it gets our attention.
So it's this pervasive experience that no one's talking about. It's like the elephant in the room. And we're all running away, distracting ourselves with something that makes us feel we are in control.
And I think when you face it, it is a fear, but you find that you have the courage to face it.
A lot of people out there apparently that don't realize we were born to die. And I do realize that. I remember one time a friend of my dad said to my dad, he says, "Boy, your daughter sure is brave." And my dad said, "Nah, she's just too stupid to be scared." And maybe that's what's going on right now. I'm just too stupid to be scared. I have lung cancer. It is now July of '08. I'm 5 months past my expiration date, so I consider myself to be pretty lucky.
I have a diagnosis of lung cancer that I've had for 4 years now, and I do have brain and bone metastasis.
I hadn't a clue that anything was really wrong. I had this little cough. And I went to the doctor and I told her about it, and she said, well, let's get an x-ray, and she sent me downstairs, and I got the x-ray, and by the time I got back up to her office, she had it on her computer screen, and there was a big giant tumor.
I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate to be alive, because with my diagnosis, I think I'm like in the 2 percentile at this point in time. So I keep thinking, gosh, I've had this time, you know, and have I used it well, or why have I had this time?
It's very challenging to deal with your own death. First of all, I remember Kubler-Ross talking about the fact that it's really difficult to even envision yourself dying. It's very hard to imagine yourself not being.
If the disease is progressing quickly, they have a sense of urgency to get things done.
You know, at the same time, I have to say it's not easy. It's really been a hard 4 years.
There's not one experience that anyone who is dying of cancer can have that's outside the realm of our own personal experience.
The day the doctor tells you that you have cancer, it doesn't matter what kind of cancer or what stage, you feel like you've just been handed a death sentence. Your life changes and it'll never be the same again. And it doesn't matter if it's a cancer that has a 99% survival rate or one that has 1%, your life changes.
Your perspective on your relationships, your beliefs. Before my diagnosis, I would probably say, gosh, I know real well that I could step off a curb and be hit. But I have to tell you, when you have a terminal diagnosis, you don't have that perspective anymore, because you know you're probably going to die within a limited time period.
Once it leaves the lungs, there are 3 likely places for it to go. One is brain, one is bones, one is liver. Brain is the one that scares me. I've kind of lived and died by mine. My brains are important to me. I've used them. But I have been told that I am unusual, and I've been told this by a number of people in the medical profession who have said that it's more likely when a person is dying that they will go into denial and not face it head on.
You're not in a situation where the old ways of relating to each other work anymore. So you're in a situation where you're being very present with what's happening day in and day out.
And I think it's fair to say that people that have a level of wisdom and a level of spirituality and a level of acceptance have a much easier time.
As to why I feel so good when my prognosis is so bad, I don't know. My oncologist said, you're doing something right. I don't know what it is, but whatever you're doing, don't stop.
I think Cindy is a wonderful, very brave person, a very much of a risk taker, and letting things fall where they may.
As I'm out of treatment and have a couple of months where I'm feeling more energy, you know, there's a tendency to kind of feel like, oh, everything's normal again. And then all of a sudden, you know, you get all these MRIs and all these tests coming up, and the reality of it really comes back in a harsh way.
I am transformed by the experience of being with those who are facing their own mortality. In fact, that's why I work with cancer patients, because they are my greatest teachers.
Because the masks come off and people deal with you from their hearts. And in everyday life, people are afraid to unmask themselves, to give you that kind of revelation of themselves.
They have a different awareness and a different experience of life than most of us do.
It makes almost more stark the contrast between how I live my life now, post-death sentence, versus before. Because before I took it all for granted. And I don't take anything for granted anymore. Well, there have been some recent studies regarding vitamin D and cancer.
Yes.
And I thought maybe it was time for me to hit it.
Yes,
Can't hurt.
It's a really great supplement.
It's not like I'm not dying anyway, so trying...
You could make your own.
Exactly, exactly. I'm not on any chemo anymore. I'm not on any traditional treatments. There is no reason for me not to try some of these things. If I were to guess, I would guess that I probably have at least another 3 months that may be pain-free, that I may have energy, or next week my heart may stop. We don't know. I plan to enjoy every day to the fullest until then.
Her attitude on life and quality of life is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced. She fills my heart more than I could ever do anything for her.
I decorated the heck out of this deck. I had Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I had Frosty the Snowman, I had lights all over the place. I had 4 Christmas trees. Yep. And you know what? I left them up until late March, which was when I started the gardening, because I said, this might be my last Christmas, and I'm going to make the most of it. So I had it lasted 4 months.
I'm at a point now where I can say I've been able to integrate this into my life rather than just thinking, that's the end.
I may have become adjusted to the fact that I'm dying, but that doesn't mean I want to go any sooner than I have to.
There's still too many things I want to be doing. You know, life is interesting, and there's a lot of things that are important and a lot of things that you want to do and be creative and be of service and work and, you know, and you deal with that every day in your life. But when I think you're in this kind of situation, I still deal with that.
But deaths come in many forms: the death of a relationship, the death of an experience at a work situation where people may have been, you know, in a family-like environment for 15, 20 years, and that comes to an end with a termination. So there are many terminations or ending points throughout our lifespan that I think are there to prepare us for the ultimate end of our lives.
I have a friend, and both of us, since we've been diagnosed, have been complimented by other people. You are so brave, or you are so courageous, you're facing this head on, so on and so forth. And we have had private conversations with each other about the fact that either that is true or we are both in total denial. And we won't know until the end which is true. For all we know, we're going to turn into whimpering, whining babies when we get to the end. I mean, who knows?
It's quite a journey where I think your life is just amplified and things are in focus and you're really in a corner dealing with them. This is what I take down.
Now that I know that I'm dying with a timetable as versus the fact that all of us are dying, I have learned to treasure every day. I wake up in the morning happy to have awakened. Yes. Me and Mick and David. It makes me laugh every time I look at it. It does. It brings a smile to my face and makes me laugh even when I can't dance. And then there's the cute booties. I'm so bad. My days, I treasure the activities of my days or the non-activities. I treasure the days that I grab a paperback and go lay down out on the swing and read for a few hours in the afternoon. My wish list, when I get down to the last 2 weeks, peanut butter, jelly, homemade fudge, my brother's homemade blackberry jelly, my mother's and my sister-in-law's homemade fudge, and Bailey's on the rocks, lots of Bailey's, a few rocks.
I can take you right here.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I am a pragmatic person, in my own way. Pragmatic with lots of flights of fancy. Do those go together? I don't think so. There's a bit of a contradiction there, but I mean, I know I'm dying. That is a given. I'm a stage 4B. I'm definitely dying. I'm metastasized to the liver. There's no doubt I'm going down. But my short-term goal, and it's my #1 goal, is to live through the first Tuesday in November. I want to not only be able to cast my vote for Barack Obama, but I want to see him win, which I am positive he's going to do. And I'm not positive it can happen without me, so I'm just going to have to stay alive.
All right. That's all we need to do.
The same failed politics that we've seen over the last 8 years and somehow expect a different result. We need fundamental change in this country.
Often it's the family who wants the patient to keep fighting.
We want people here, so we will watch them suffer. We will cater to them. We'll bring water just to keep them alive because we need them to be alive, not because of what they are going through themselves.
They feel that the patient is giving up, and they want to rally the patient to keep fighting, and it causes a lot of anxiety for the patient, who oftentimes is ready to accept this is the end phase of my life.
When my mother died, if I could have kept her alive on ventilators or whatever, just to be here, I probably would have been selfish to some extent. But I realized that she was tired and it was time.
Another day, another 2 days, another 3. Excuse me. This is a person who is dying, whose life is miserable. You've got them on all kinds of pain medicine while giving them food and water to keep them alive. This is putting yourself first.
Family members may stay in denial for a very long time. So the person who is dying realizes, if I try to engage with you about this, about my experience, and I get, oh no, you're gonna be fine.
We gotta try physical therapy. You need to take this medication. You need to get up every day. That's the problem, you're not getting up every day.
They recognize they're hitting a wall.
Then the patient begins to stop talking about it because they see that it's provoking anxiety.
You're a witness to their suffering, and there's a great sense of futility because often you can do so little to alleviate the suffering.
My oncologist and I had a long discussion. There are only 2 other potential chemos out there for me to try. Both of them have less than a 20% chance of working, more like 10%. And they've got about a 90% chance of being toxic to my health. So I have opted to stop all therapy.
That can be a very complex situation because you have competing ideas of how people want to proceed.
I have chosen for voluntary refusal of water and nutrition when I get down to toward the end, and for palliative sedation. Palliative sedation is when the patient asks to be put in a coma. I want that to happen if I reach the point that I'm in incredible pain. If I'm miserable, put me out of my misery. Put me into a coma status. That is not considered to be euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide under the law. I may not be able to control death itself, but I can control the details and make it as pleasant as possible for both me and my family. And that way they don't have to make decisions and second guess later whether or not it was the right one, because I've made those decisions ahead of time.
You know, I deal with my own diagnosis and my own ups and downs, and without minimizing it, I also try to remember there are just so many people in this world that have got very different circumstances than I, you know, and I'm incredibly grateful for what I've got.
There's always somebody out there that has it worse.
Well, my mother is experiencing some form of dementia. She needs help with every aspect of her life. She needs to be fed and cleaned, and she can't do anything for herself. I enjoy my time with my mother, and going there is like a sanctuary. And it'll be interesting to see if I really am open and finished with the gift she's given me, or if I'm holding on to her for some reason. I don't know. For some reason, she's staying.
You know, that's the gift that particular person is bestowing upon us. You know, of opening our eyes and expanding into an awareness that there's so much more to be experienced through this than what we perceive as grief and suffering and loss and separation. That if we can open up to a whole new experience, then we will all be profoundly affected.
I've seen that she teaches profoundly and is a presence of great import to my life. And I'm learning daily from her and the opportunities that her life right now has presented me.
You really learn so much about living, that's the real gift.
How are you going to learn about your own mortality unless someone close to you dies?
I lost my husband 5.5 years ago, and it was a sudden death and a tragic death. Had to take him off life support. That was a very big life lesson about how little we really control.
I think it's very important to have a ritual and an opportunity to memorialize a person's life.
There's a lot of feelings that come up walking in a funeral home. Having the death loss experiences, it brings me right back to those times.
It's a very emotional time for family members, and they're very, very vulnerable.
You know, it's a business and it provides a great service that's needed. And I think they try to be kind and accommodating.
Many times a day, we will meet with families who, when they come through the doors of our funeral home, are critical or cynical or expect us to take advantage of a situation because the national media jumps on those stories.
Our profession is like any other profession. You have your good attorneys and your bad attorneys. You have your good plumbers and your not so good plumbers. We're the same. But it only takes one, because of the sensitivity of what we do, that makes us all look bad.
What you don't hear are 99% of the time, funeral homes are doing extraordinary things for families at very difficult times.
The folk that I know have buried people at no cost when they didn't have it. Some I know have even, put themselves in financial jeopardy trying to help people at that time in their lives.
The number one thing, they all think we make tons of money. But they don't realize that so much of the fees and charges that we charge go straight out to the florist, to the newspaper, to the health department, to the cemetery.
I had an experience picking out an urn, and I was married to a geologist, so I knew that I wanted it to be some form of rock, and it turned out to be marble. Small urn was hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
You have families that want to keep a little bit of their loved one. So what you have here are all like little keepsakes that people just keep a little bit. A little bit of cremains go up in here. Underneath, you keep a little bit of the cremated remains in here, and then here's this lovely little vase that you have. This is a memory glass, and in here, I have these blowers and these little specky white things. Those are cremated remains in there. The teddy bear, it has this heart, and you can either put a locket of hair or cremains or just a photo in the bear.
A portion of the cremated remains are inserted here, and the loved one can wear those cremated remains. And what may be strange to some is very, very important and appropriate for others. Cremated remains are placed in here with the memorial etching here.
It feels pretty impersonal, no matter how nice they try to be. It's pretty impersonal, and suddenly you're picking out caskets and markers and embalming and services and flowers and music, and you just get in this role.
We even have now the opportunity, we feel very strongly, of letting the family participate in the selection process in a more tangible way. And so they're able to come and use a touchscreen monitor to make their selections. And let me get out of here. Just selecting a casket. We're showing the family can come in and click through and see how they can personalize a casket.
Doing a traditional funeral can really break families financially. The average cost of a funeral is, I believe, a traditional funeral, including the burial at the cemetery, $10,000 up.
Sometimes the guilt that those of us who are left behind feel when we have to bury someone causes us to overspend.
When someone dies, and especially if they die suddenly, you're in shock. You're in your own denial and isolation period, and so you're not always able to make the best judgments, the best decisions. So if you have some of those decisions in place prior to that time, you're less likely to be taken advantage of.
You shouldn't just blame the funeral directors, it's also what the people wanted. And this is why you have these market on caskets. You know, I mean, you can buy the caskets online.
It doesn't have to cost a lot, and people need to know they can make their own casket. They don't even need a casket if they're doing cremation. The crematory generally provides a box for the body.
I have seen people put diamond rings on their loved ones and to be buried. And when I'm sure their loved one would rather for them to have taken that money and put it towards something else, they didn't have to be buried.
It's important for me to fulfill those wishes that he or she made with me.
I think the public needs to understand they have the right to ask questions. They have the right to be there when their loved one is cremated. They have the right to study a funeral bill.
It seems like there's a movement now that families are wanting to be more involved in that ritual.
What we do is really make it so they can do a very simple funeral if they want. When they're doing things themselves, it costs less. We're a non-profit organization, and our mission is to educate and empower families so they can care for their own dead. So it's doing things the way it was done maybe 150 years ago, where families are really involved and connected to the death.
It gives you a process to go from the loss and the confusion to the beauty of it.
With Pinky, her family had had time to prepare. She did have a long illness, was exiting over years, really. And so even though it's a shock to know someone's really gone, they did have that time. And they were also embracing this death as a part of nature, that it was part of the cycle of life.
Remember when I talked about my uncle being gray and chalky?
Yeah.
There's no reason for that now, because today embalming fluid have dyes in it already. When we're embalming, the tissue changes color. So you can see the coloring come, and then you know you're getting fluid. Yeah, which, there's no such thing as the gray, chalky body. We're working with the circulatory system, which is your arteries and your veins. So we inject embalming fluid into the artery and we drain to the vein. Well, this one has 21.5 index of formaldehyde, and there's also like lanolin and some other emollients so that the body doesn't necessarily dehydrate so quickly.
It just doesn't make sense to empty the body of all its bodily fluids and then pump it full of fluids so it's pumped up and it looks as normal as possible.
All the plumbing has been cut, so now we have to individually pick up the left arm and the right arm and the left side of the face, and then we have to suture everything back up. 90% of my business is direct cremation.
Some people choose cremation for spiritual reasons. It's purification by fire.
We have societies in our world that you wouldn't think of anything other than cremation. It's the law of the land.
The process of cremation, with my machine, it's approximately 4 hours here. They have newer machines that take up to an hour only. When everything's done, this is what's left. And as you can see, it's all bone. People always say to me, it's ashes. Well, it's not ashes, it's bone. You can still feel the heat in here. It was done earlier.
90% of us are made out of water. So what's left in my chamber is in skeletal system. It's not embalmed, therefore there's no chemicals. We're in our natural state.
This is it. This is one adult.
But as the years went on, I realized, there was too much focus on the remains and not enough focus on the people they leave behind.
When we consider that our mission is making important differences in people's lives, obviously we're talking about how we can help the survivors, the living.
When they walk in our door, it's real. I'm just here to take care of their loved one. But more importantly, take care of them.
90% of the families that come through our doors know what they want, but a much lesser percentage know what they need. We then have to become educators. We have to help them understand that there are certain tasks that we believe that they need to engage in to lean into their grief process.
Doing this work helps me actually with my own mortality.
And there's going to be times that we meet with families that they really get to you. And when they do, it's okay. Because then it keeps you in check that you're human.
The whole funeral industry has done a really nice job in really meeting the family's needs. And we work with funeral homes who have the children come in, who really let them be part of that process, which is really important for kids to be able to do, to feel like they had some say in this. My daughter had cancer when she was 3 and died when she was 4, or just a month before she turned 4. My son was 9, and I remember him telling me when she was sick, "Well, she won't die, Mom. Children don't die." And so how do you explain that to a child? Yeah, children do die.
I just went to visit her in the hospital, and I thought they would cure it or something.
When I saw a grief counselor, I said, ignore my degrees, ignore my background. I'm a grieving mother like anybody else. And with my son, the same thing. I couldn't be there. I'd worked with children in trauma for years, but with my own child in trauma, I couldn't help him like I would have liked to. So I had him see other professionals.
First couple weeks, I was sad, but then, but now I'm not as sad as much. I'm used to it now. So yeah.
Children, for example, who are dying of cancer often have a prescience about their life and their experience that most of us don't have. And I think it's because they develop an awareness of what this really is all about, this life is all about. So they have a kind of wisdom that is far beyond their years. And they often are instructive to their own family. I was talking to someone just the other day who was saying they realized their child was ready to die. They weren't ready to let the child go. And the child was really suffering. And the child really needed to be able to let go. And one day the parent woke up and said, I'm preventing this. I'm blocking this child's passage to another place, and got up and went to the child and said, I'm really sorry. I haven't been ready, but I know you're ready. It's okay, you can go. And the child died right away.
When she actually died, she went to sleep and just never woke up. And what a beautiful thing to be able to do. It was a shock for us because we weren't expecting it. But yet, for her sake, I think, oh, what a wonderful way to go.
Sometimes the actual death then is a form of relief, only because you know that that person is now free from their suffering.
Well, after the movie, I think it was time for me and Grace to go to bed. And then I said, good night to her, and then she went up to bed, and I went to bed or something. That was the last time I ever saw Grace.
My sister died in '69, 39 years ago, and my parents changed and they never made it back.
In my opinion, it was the worst thing I could have possibly gone through, was having my daughter die. But and nothing will ever make that okay.
She didn't get to say goodbye to us. We didn't get to say goodbye to her. And she never got to have a life. She didn't have marriage, children, career, travel, hobbies, everything that I've gotten to have. She was 20 years old. I'm 62.
I still miss Glenda, and I always will. And there's always that ache for her, that hurting. And it's going to be hard to lose both of them.
I mean, if you're watching someone who is suffering from a terminal illness and they're allowed to go through their different, stages of grieving and dealing with their upcoming demise, that helps the family, and there's some time, there's some preparation. If a child is killed suddenly, that can be almost overwhelming.
Nothing's easy about death that is out of generation order. Surviving your own children has got to be the worst thing in the world.
And many times I'll get to a point where, like, I guess I'll never know why. And I heard someone once say that you go from asking why to asking what. So you stop asking all the whys and you start saying, well, what can I do? What can I do now? And what can I do to embrace this person's memory or to honor them?
One of the most difficult things for me in getting my diagnosis has been my mother. She already lost one child. She's about to survive her last child. That upsets me. I know it's not my fault, but I hate that it's happening to her.
I'm going to miss her so much. She's my very best friend and a loving daughter.
Many people spend the end phase of their life suffering because either they don't know about hospice soon enough, or when they learn about hospice, they have such an association with it that they feel it's giving up.
Oh my God, the doctor wants my mother to go on hospice. The dreaded word. Hospice is not a dreaded word.
And that it isn't saying, okay, you might as well just lie down and die. Instead, let's live every moment you have to the fullest.
They're all about comfort care. They have made my life so much more comfortable than it would have been otherwise. I mean, they come out and do things that otherwise I would be having to go to the doctor or even hospital stays. I have been able to avoid hospital stays before that. Well, I'm much more comfortable here in my own home than in a hospital. My setup in here, I talked about it being perfect. I mean, I have my laptop, I have my good speakers, I have an iPod, I have over 2,800 songs on it, and over 1,000 pictures, various, old, new, whatever. I have my fiction, my nonfiction, my political, my DVDs, my VCR, my bills and stuff, my bill paying, my paperwork is all right there within reach. It's perfect. I have created this little haven for myself that is just perfect.
We consider the patient being the whole family, not just the person with the diagnosis.
Hospice, because of the skills of the medical team that works with patients at end of life, are capable of providing the palliative care,
which is one step before hospice. I will, because of my decision last week to stop therapy, I will be moving from palliative to hospice.
To palliate means to soothe or comfort, to treat symptoms. In palliative care, they're given a diagnosis, unlike hospice, that says that if this disease progresses in its normal progression, this person will probably not be alive 12 months from now, whereas in hospice, it's 6 months.
I honestly believe that I probably would not be alive today if not for the care that they've given me. I mean, they're out here every week, practically every day. I've got somebody coming in to help me.
I'm working with great clientele that appreciate me and love me, and I can turn around and love them back. And showing that to people, that means everything to me.
Actually, Katie's the boss, and the reason I say that is because she's always telling me what to do.
It's all because I love you.
Yes, I do.
Helping someone in their dying situation
is a very honorable place to go with another human being.
We consider ourselves midwives at the other end of life.
Being able to take someone that close to what I feel like is them going back to God, it was a miracle. And we can't go any further. And we can give them all of the love and the care we need, but we're only ticketed passengers beyond this point.
Yes, you grieve over and over again when you lose patients. You grieve more deeply for some patients than others.
Working in hospice, I was able to see the miracle of death rather than just death as the enemy.
We're lucky enough to be able to get to know people at a very intimate time of their life, and we're, I think, honored guests in their home.
When I work with families and they're so wonderful at expressing love amidst all the grief, and they get their stuff out the way to take care of this person who has died, it's an incredible gift to be around that.
Kathy, why don't you lead the way?
It may sound crazy to some people, but that's a very special feeling. It's a very special feeling.
It was an experience where I think you learn so much at the time and yet you don't know it. You're so focused on just being with the person and what has to be done physically, emotionally, and mentally, and how to cope with things.
It really brought generations together, the patient's children, their children, and their grandchildren. You know, it was beautiful.
I worked with a family where there was an elderly mother dying, 5 daughters, 2 of whom were there at the event of death, and they were coaching their mother. It took them a lot to get to the point where they were able to say to their mother, "Mom, you can go," and the words they used were "wings on your feet," to give her encouragement, because there was a sense that she was working hard to leave.
It's usually peaceful.
The people that have trouble going, there's a little bit of chaos in the air.
And it makes it hard too, I find, when I'm with a patient who is going through this process and everyone around them in the room is grieving. It's very difficult for that person to leave.
Frequently, family members will be saying, "Mom, you have permission to go. We're going to be okay." And there's lots of tears and love. And it's an intense, wonderful, joyous experience because everyone is just almost rallying that person onto their next phase in their journey. But people will often be holding a patient's hand. The breath is very labored, and you can just see that everything now is just all the organs and everything is shutting down. All of a sudden, there's like a quietness.
It's like the frequency patterns shift and change, and their anxiety and fear, and the vibration of the whole experience changes.
And then it's almost as if you feel that spiritual being in the room with you.
And that bond can still be felt, sometimes even more keenly and strongly than when the person was embodied.
Some of the things we don't talk about because we do fear that people will think that we are crazy. And some of the things that we don't share is because our theologies or our doctrines say this, and what we feel or what we experience is not congruent with that, so you better keep it to yourself.
My brother Herbert was here. Somebody will say, "What? Herbert couldn't have been here. He died 30 years ago." And that'll cause the patient to stop talking.
It's a beautiful thing when it satisfies and pleases the person who's seeing it.
Is it okay if, for your mom, Herbert was here? And we'll talk about what all that means to her and work that out.
I also saw with my father the reaching with both hands, and that's not explainable to me. There are some faiths that have a belief system that people come to get you.
Prior to my mother's death, she told me, she said, "I saw your Uncle Bo," and that was her brother, come in. She said, he didn't frighten me. He came in and he sat on my bed. He was younger. And Uncle Bo was a dresser. He loved to dress. And she said he had on the most beautiful suit. He sat on my bed And I wasn't afraid of him.
We can't deny that it's not happening. I mean, we're in the room and we're watching this happen.
And it has to be a personal experience. It has to be something that you perceive in order to really trust it and feel that it's true.
I don't think this is lights out. I do believe that there is something beyond this, but as I get older, my sense of what that is more in flux.
Either everything's going to come to a total halt when I die, or it isn't. And if it doesn't, I have no idea what direction it might go in.
In watching people die, it actually dispels. I don't believe that people go to hell if they're not baptized. I don't think that it's anything that man does that determines the destiny of the dying.
Many people who have religious views will tell you that they believe there's a hell. I've rarely met a person who will tell you that they think they're going there. So it's usually they think they're going to a reward, that it's a good thing, you know, a positive experience, not a hellish one.
But I don't believe that there's a heaven and you're walking on clouds. And I believe that there's this energy and that our energy never stops, that it's eternal, that will last forever. And when we die, we're not really destroyed. This vessel, our human bodies are gone, but that energy is still out in the universe.
I believe there's a continuity after death. It's a transition, it's a birth into the spiritual.
Everybody's somewhat in the same boat unless they have very strong beliefs that they really believe to be true and this is what's going to happen. And
I believe we live before we ever came here to Earth. We'll have an opportunity to live with our family, as family.
I will be joined with my husband again someday.
When we come to grips with that, the finality, that is not as final as we fear, and that there is something beyond that, I think for me it has freed me up to be more free to live.
It's almost like